Get ready to dive into the Stellar Scholar Speaker Archetype with my guest, Dr. Kristen Albert, on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. This is the first episode in our new series exploring the 4 speaker archetypes. I talked about these speaker archetypes back earlier this summer, and if you haven't yet taken our free quiz to figure out which archetype you are, you can do so by going to speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Knowing your archetype will help you to create more impactful and memorable presentations, to market and position yourself as a speaker using your strengths, and to try our recommendations to take your talks to the next level. In today's episode, we're talking about the Stellar Scholar Speaker Archetype with my guest and Thought Leader Academy grad, Kristen Albert, Ed.D. Here's the thing with Stellar Scholars, and perhaps no surprise, about 50% of everyone who's taken the quiz has been a Stellar Scholar. So this is definitely the one that's most well represented. As a Stellar Scholar, your presentations are value-packed with insights and expertise, and you really enjoy digging into the details and probably the research as well. You have drive and ambition, and you're always looking to improve and master something new. You love to identify connections between things and find solutions to even the most difficult of problems, and you make things happen. Your big challenge is that sometimes you might be a bit too technical and tactical, a bit too research focused in your presentations by sticking only to the facts. So Kristen and I talk about how she's leveraged her strengths as a Stellar Scholar, plus what she's learned about the power of incorporating personal stories into her talks and the results that she's had so far. Chris is the president and lead coach of Turning Points, LLC. She's the host of the online Turning Points leadership community and the Turning Points and Leadership podcast. Chris has a doctorate in leadership from the University of Delaware and is a certified leadership circle profile practitioner. So you can see she is very well credentialed and she has a lot of expertise and experience, as most Stellar Scholars have. Again, if you haven't yet taken our free quiz, it's 10 multiple choice questions, just takes a few minutes. You get your results right away. You can do so by going to speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to dig in today with your speaker archetype result, which is the Stellar Scholar. And before we get into that, please introduce yourself to the listeners. Tell us what you do within your organization, Turning Points.
Yes, thank you. My name's Dr. Kristen Albert. My friends call me Chris, so hence call me Chris. And I am a leadership development coach for Turning Points. It's a women-owned business that I started in 2012. So I just celebrated my 10th anniversary last year. So in addition to my one-on-one coaching with my clients, so I work with a lot of women executives doing leadership coaching, really helping them to shatter that glass ceiling. They've already shattered the glass ceiling, but facing the leadership challenges that come along with that. So I work one-on-one with clients. I also facilitate and host a Turning Points leadership community, which is focused, and we'll talk more about this, on a broader base of folks who are interested in growing their leadership development. And then I'm also the host of my podcast, Turning Points in Leadership, where I interview people that I see as leading in their spheres of influence without necessarily having a title to do so, and the impact that they are making in their leadership work.
And Chris, I know we've gotten to know each other because you were in a Thought Leader Academy from May and then graduated in August, so not that long ago. And we worked together during those 4 months on your thought leadership and on your signature talk. And we will talk a little bit more about that in this episode as well. And your podcast came out of the Thought Leadership container because we encourage the women who go through the Thought Leadership Academy to choose a container for their thought leadership. It could be a podcast, a LinkedIn live show, an event, an initiative, and so on. Many of you end up choosing a podcast because you probably like speaking, and it's a great way to not only get your message out, but also to get to know other people who you invite on as guests. So congrats on the podcast launch.
Thank you. Thank you. When I started the Thought Leader Academy and we talked about containers, I said, there's no way I am doing a podcast. I was deeply set against it, and I think that was because I had set such high expectations for how many I needed to get out over a period of time. And, when you set, I know this, right? When you set reasonable expectations for yourself, you set the expectations that you want to achieve, and then you're good. So I launched it in July, and it comes out on the fourth Friday of every month. And I committed to 6 in the first season. So I'm really excited about it.
Well, and I really do appreciate that there are so many different ways to do a podcast. And of course, here at Speaking Your Brand, we release a podcast every single week, and we have since early 2017. And I love podcasting. So for me, that works really well. But as we encourage you all, you could do bi-weekly, you could do monthly, you could do seasons, you could do a 6-episode capsule podcast. Make it make sense for you and what your goals are and what fits into your work.
Exactly. It is part of my Turning Points leadership community. It's one of the things that come out. They get the whole video, kind of like what we're doing right now. The whole video gets produced and put onto the Turning Points in Leadership community. But then the podcast goes out on I think 11 different podcast channels. So it's just wonderful.
All right. Well, let us talk about your speaker archetype quiz result. So for those of you listening, we released a quiz in July of this year. And I kind of had this idea of, we see so many different women who we've worked with, hundreds of women over the years, and everyone has their own speaking and communication style. And as we always say, we want to amplify what your natural strengths are. We're not trying to fit you into a speaker mold that you may imagine is what you have to be a successful speaker. Instead, we really want you to double down on your strengths, but then add elements just to make you that much more of a well-rounded speaker. So I came up with this idea for this quiz to help you identify which speaker archetype. There are 4 different results. So that's what we're covering on the podcast this month. One of the results is called the Stellar Scholar. And this so far has been about 50% of all the people who've taken the quiz so far have gotten the result of the Stellar Scholar. So definitely it is the number one, and no surprise, because I think so many of the women who come to Speaking Your Brand, that's where they tend to be. They're experts in what they do. They're subject matter experts. They're really good at presentations and putting together to content, yet they also know there's something more that they want to do. So for those of you listening, if you want to go take the quiz, go to speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Just takes a few minutes, 10 multiple choice questions. It's fun and it's easy to fill out. So you can pause here, go take the quiz, and then come back and listen, knowing what your result is. So Chris, let me ask you this. You got the Stellar Scholar result. And when you got that and you read through the description of it, what resonated with you?
Well, it didn't surprise me. Let's put it that way. What resonated with me was that it really fit with my entire scope of my career. I was in education for 30 years before I started Turning Points, and I have a doctorate in educational leadership. I mean,
so you are the scholar.
I'm a scholar. And when I look back, at first I thought, I don't want to be the Stellar Scholar. I want to break that mold. But what you just said about seeing yourself as that's where you started, that's where I started. And I have a file cabinet behind me with presentation after presentation after presentation after presentation that all went somewhere and then stopped, somewhere and then stopped. And I think the beauty of what we're talking about as a Stellar Scholar, as a speaking archetype, is the influence, the greater influence and impact that comes from taking it beyond the subject matter expert, right? And I'm thinking about the diagram that you showed of our journeys through the process, and taking it from the subject matter expert and presenting on those topics, but now taking that and taking it to a place where people are resonating with your message and they are being inspired to take it even further, right? So I was talking about this with one of my clients this morning, because that's where I see her. She's on this cusp of making this shift from needing to be the one with all the answers to inspiring people to embrace those ways of thinking, and to also be creative and growing out of the inspiration of what she brings. So it resonated with me a lot. Part of me said, oh, I don't want to be a stellar scholar. But like you just said, we are who we are. And so to embrace what we are and to use it, it reminded me a little bit of the Enneagram, right? So when you're in the Enneagram, when you're at your best in the Enneagram, and then when you're at your worst in the Enneagram. So who am I at my best as a stellar scholar, right? Rather than being a little sad that I am the stellar scholar. No, embrace it. And what does that bring at my best as a stellar scholar?
Yes. And Kristen, you are far from alone. And I know that so many of us, and I have a background in academia as well. So I am the stellar scholar. That is my natural default. I love creating presentations. I love thinking through content and frameworks and models and acronyms. You know this because you've been through our program. But yet knowing that is reassuring, because then I know that, yes, that is the way that I like to present information, but then knowing, but what else can I do to make this even better? And that's where we're, adding stories into it, maybe adding some performance elements into especially the in-person speaking and presentations that we do. And I know for those of you listening and for Chris, I mean, you have a background in academia, especially going to academic conferences. What do you see? The presenter behind the podium, oftentimes reading notes in front of them or reading notes on the slides, lots of text on the slides. And we almost feel like that's the way things are supposed to be done because that's the way we've always seen them to be done. Yet we know they're not effective as a communication and learning approach. So it's like, okay, how can we take what we love about information and content and then make it better for our audiences?
Amen. Little known fact, I was a middle school teacher for a good number of those years. So there's that performance aspect, right? They don't care what you know. You're actually a performer. So bringing that into my presentations felt very natural. And I'm a musician also, a performing musician. So standing up in front of audiences on stage as a performing musician, having to improvise. And recently a siren went off at one of our live performances. And I was told that there were going to be 3 of them once they went off. It was a fire siren. It was an outdoor concert. Chris, there are going to be 3 of them and they're each going to be a minute long, right? And I was standing up getting ready to speak. So I had to do my little song and dance. I had them singing along to the siren. So just these performance aspects that you add, but yet what I love about the stellar scholar is that I want my work to be grounded in research. I want it to have the underpinnings of research. And that's really important to me.
Absolutely. And as it should be, because that is, you have especially you have all these credentials and experience in the work that you do, and you absolutely should bring that to your presentations. And so for those of you listening who know that you're a stellar scholar, if you took the quiz or you can probably guess based on what we're talking about, if you feel like that fits you, then make sure to definitely include those research, those insights, those expert insights that you have in your presentations. And then also add some personal stories to your presentations. And again, I know for those of you who come from academia or say come from STEM fields, it can feel odd to say, well, why would anyone in my audience care about a personal story in my presentations if I'm just sharing research, if I'm just sharing expert insights? And Chris, I know that we talked quite a bit in the Thought Leader Academy about some of your personal stories and including them in your talks. And how did you feel at the beginning of that? And then what did you see the impact was when you started sharing personal stories?
I think I wondered if my stories really mattered. It's easy to get wrapped up in the academics around leadership. I think this is one of those kind of pet peeves of mine that, I mean, there's so much out there about leadership, but the underpinnings being in research, right? So who wants to hear my story? But then I realized that my story gave me an opportunity to illustrate the facts, right? It was a way of saying, here's leadership embodied. Here is leadership applied. Here's how I tripped and fell, but then this is how I rose, and this is a leadership story, right? And so I think that was a real eye-opener for me to realize how my story was a story of leadership. And it was every bit as relevant. And when I shared it with an audience recently, the gasps, it was really, just that actually happened. And then weaving that story throughout to make my point. And they got it. Would they have gotten it so strongly had I not shared the story? Probably not.
Yeah, you're forming a deeper connection with your audience. It's also much more memorable for them when they think back to what they heard from you, what they learned from you. And also, this is what happens when we share our stories, is that the people in the audience, they're thinking of their own story that may be very different from whatever experience or situation you're sharing, but they're thinking, oh, have I had a leadership mishap in my work or my life, or have I had something where something happened unexpectedly, and then what did I do about it? So they're putting themselves in that challenge that you're facing.
I think what happens is as it relates to my story, a lot of people see themselves as helpless related to the other leaders. Maybe they're poor leaders in their story, right? And they see themselves as helpless. Kind of you can't fight City Hall kind of thing. When you've got leaders that are protective and protecting and controlling, right? And you think, well, I have no agency around that. Well, actually you do. And that's your leadership, how you work around that and with that. That's your leadership. I think it's empowering to see both sides of that coin, how your experience might have really been awful, but then seeing how you can actually turn that into a gift or an opportunity. And that's leadership too.
Oh, so well said. I like that, Chris.
Thank you.
So this is a good segue into your signature talk, the message that you want to share with your audiences. So can you tell us about that?
I believe that each and every one of us, everyone that's listening to this podcast right now, each of one of us is capable of leading and responsible for leading within our sphere of influence, our spheres of influence. Part of that is recognizing that we have the agency to step in, even if we don't think we do. And there are appropriate times where we can be catalysts for change simply because we were willing to step in and step up and be responsible for being part of the change that we wanted to see. And so when I speak to my audiences, I want them to see themselves through that lens. There's also a part of that, the research that says 80% of people get stuck at the level of the socialized mind, which means they care about what people think and they care about doing things according to the rules. And they are kind of stuck in this fitting in mindset. 80% of people, which means only 20% of people are leading at a higher level. And I think that's why, and this is part of my talk, why I think we're in the mess that we're in as a society. And it's not that the leaders that are leading are have malintent. It's that they don't know that they haven't done the inner work to be able to move beyond that socialized mind to being creative leaders. And so part of my thought leadership and my talk is really encouraging people, first of all, to recognize that you are where you are, and that's okay, because that's where you are, but it's not okay to stop there. So not only do you have the ability to keep working on yourself and working on your leadership, but you also have the responsibility for doing so. And I think our society, we have so many people that the loud ones are the ones that are getting all the attention. There are others of us that have things to say and meaningful messages to share. And we need to become stable and rooted and able to take that space and step into that space and say, I belong here. I belong here. I have things to say. I have visions for making this organization better, for making the relationships in this organization better, for serving the people whom we serve better. And I have visions for that, and I'm going to step in and take a risk. And that's part of my leadership message.
And Chris, I'm thinking about the work that you do. Do you mostly work with leaders who are in organizations? So not entrepreneurs, but leaders who work for, say, mid-sized companies.
It started out mostly with entrepreneurs, but now I'm working mainly with folks that are working within organizations.
And what are their biggest challenges when it comes to leadership?
For the women that I work with, a lot of them are struck by imposter syndrome, right? And I don't really like to give it a label, but when I say imposter syndrome, you all know what I mean. That moment when you are believing that the people who are judging you think that you're better than you believe yourself to be. Right? Oh my gosh, they think I'm all that in a bag of chips if they only knew. And then you're like protecting, trying to, So that's one of the biggest issues. The other issue in situations where there is, we women are still clawing our way to the top, right? And so how to step into leadership as a woman and to not have to posture in the old school way to be male-like or dominant in order to make the strides, to be able to show up with the gifts that women have from the core of who they are and the beautiful and intelligent people that they are, and step in confidently and courageously into those spaces without all of the questioning and the self-doubt and the judgment and the need to hyperachieve and the tendency to avoid the difficult conversations. I mean, there are just all kinds of things that get in our way. It's the inner game that women have difficulty with. They're great with strategy. They're great getting it done, right? And they're good at creating relationships, but it's their inner work that holds them back. The inner game drives the outer game. You've got to be paying attention to that first and foremost so that you can step boldly and be successful as a leader.
And Chris, this reminds me that just recently I saw an article, I believe it was on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if LinkedIn was the source of the survey or if it was another organization. I'll see if I can dig it up and put it in the show notes. But the gist of the survey that they had done was looking at the workplace and looking at women leaders versus men leaders. And the stats were something like there were 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 more male leaders than women leaders in organizations. And they asked, the survey respondents, okay, so, different questions related to leadership. And what they found, and I need to go back and read the details on that, was that according to their results, women did not want the leadership positions.
Interesting. I wonder if they were able to uncover some of the reasons why.
I would have to go back and look because I was curious about that as well. It could be work-life balance, childcare, other responsibilities. Certainly, you may not want a leadership position because you may feel like it entails a lot more hours, a lot more work and responsibility when you have other responsibilities that you have to take care of as the woman. And it could be also to your point about perhaps these women in the workforce saw leadership with these masculine traits, or that almost feeling like they had to adopt some of these masculine qualities that like maybe being more aggressive or competitive or what have you. And maybe they felt like that didn't align with who they were. So they didn't want to seek those leadership positions.
Yeah, highly likely. And the other thing I think of too is we women we're pretty smart. We recognize when we have to work 10 times harder than a man. And do we really want to get, are we in for that? Do we want to fight that fight? Because that's real too.
Right. Especially if we're not getting paid as much, which the gender pay gap still very much exists.
I was putting together this document that I posted in the Thought Leader Academy Mighty Networks community. And it's my speaker packet, right? And my husband said to me, he said, your colleagues, I have a group of 3 other coach colleagues that I work with monthly, we're a collaborative, and they're all men. And then there's me. And Doug says, they haven't had to do that. And I have asked them, so what's the secret to your success? And they say, you just need to do good work. And I think, well, yeah, maybe I just need to do good work. That isn't true. I do good work, but I have to work so much harder to make the inroads that I see these gentlemen making. They don't see it. They wouldn't see it. But I'm thankful that my husband sees that. It gives me that affirmation.
Wow, what a helpful perspective. And it also reminds me that as speakers, and for men who are listening or men who are out there, maybe get this message, is that when you see other women out there, whether women entrepreneurs, women in the workplace, women who are speakers, share with them what you charge for your fees. Share with them share with them relationships, introductions to key people. And the same thing for us, especially for us as white women, to do the same thing for Black women and women of color, to share. And this is why in the Thought Leader Academy, we're very open and transparent about what we charge for speaking fees. We encourage everyone to share what they're charging so that we know what can be expected. Otherwise, we have no clue what to charge.
Yes, we have no idea. And it's, again, one of those things that people don't want to talk about, right? They just don't want to share. They don't want to share that. I share that among my women friends. I don't have conversations with the men about what they charge.
They should have it with you. I mean, really, they should.
Yeah.
Okay. We're putting the call out. We should, I'm going to have to, when I listen to this episode again, when it goes live, I'm going to do a post on LinkedIn.
Oh, I love it.
About this. And we're going to see what happens.
I would love that.
All right. So Chris, so we've mentioned the Thought Leader Academy a few times. So you went through that, you graduated in August. Can you share with the listeners, why did you decide to join the Thought Leader Academy? What were your goals? What did you want to work on? And what was your experience like?
I joined the Thought Leader Academy because there had been some signs over the last year that things were starting to gel, but I needed that final catalyst to pull things together. My friend Mary Beth Simone had been in the Thought Leader Academy, I think the previous cohort to mine, maybe two before me, and watching her create her messaging and to step into that very confidently. I'm thinking, I want what she's got, right? That's what I want. And I remember sitting in a coffee shop with Mary Beth and saying, I'm sharing this idea. She said, you need the Thought Leader Academy. And I said, okay, I'm in, count me in. And that's what I was really seeking, was a place to hone my thought leadership message. And it's been in me for a long time, but this gave me the space and the structure and the confidence to put it out there and to step boldly into it. And so that's why I joined the Thought Leader Academy. And it was everything I had hoped for and more.
Oh, well, thank you. Of course, we're big fans of Mary Beth Simone. She's been on the podcast before, and she has a LinkedIn live show that she does. We'll make sure to include a link in the show notes to her. And her company, Niche Partnership Consulting, helps business owners with contingency planning. Contingency planning, whether it's for emergencies where you're out of your business unexpectedly, or contingency planning because you choose to be out of your business, maybe for a vacation where you really want to make sure you're unplugged and your team members have what they need so that you can do that. So that is great. So Mary Beth had attended our in-person client retreat speaking intensive that we held in April of this year, April 2022 in Orlando. And I know, Chris, you're coming to the next one in person that we're doing this coming February of 2023. And so I can't wait to that, because it's an opportunity, 3 days for you all to practice your in-person speaking on our stage, to really get in those performance elements, whether it's props, movement around the stage, vocal variation, the storytelling. So what are you most looking forward to?
Well, I am looking forward to getting a chance to get feedback. There's so often I'm up in front of audiences a lot, but I've never received really constructive feedback on my delivery. And I think that was one of the bonuses really of the Thought Leader Academy. I worked with Diane on my signature talk, but having that expertise, those eyes from folks that know what they're doing, right? And this is the same thing that happens with leadership. People are leading based on what they think they need to do and do well. It's often fly by the seat of your pants or because you're doing it naturally. What I'm looking forward to is having the experts help me to identify how I can improve my speaking so that I can be very intentional in my practice. So I don't have to stand up and wonder anymore, am I doing this okay? I want to be able to stand up and say, I am doing this way because I know this is what works. I've gotten feedback on that. And I love to be intentional. Although Heike and I were talking the other day, and this is another friend in the academy. We were doing some improv together. And I know you had mentioned improv. Improv is great. I want to develop that, but I also want to be very intentional in my speaking. So coming and getting that kind of feedback and the opportunity to just build some relationships with some amazing women. I'm so excited about that.
Me too. Obviously we do so much on Zoom, but there's nothing like in person to come together and to have that experience. So I cannot wait for that to happen.
Plus Florida in February is not hard to take.
Very true. I think most of the women who are coming are from the northern states. Like they really want to get away from the winter at that time. It is a nice time to come.
Yes.
All right, Chris, let me ask you the 3 questions that we use to wrap up these interviews. So the first one is, what is a favorite book you would like to share with the listeners?
I would like to share the book, The Authority Gap by Mary Ann Siegert. Amazing, amazing book. I told you about the 3 gentlemen that I'm in a group with, the coaching group. Each month, as we get together, we have a role to play in those meetings. And one of the months, mine was to bring a recommended book. So I brought The Authority Gap. And the response I got was, well, I'm a champion of women. I support women. I've given women legs up in all kinds of ways. And I'm saying, yes, that's fabulous. And you're working with women, you really ought to pay attention to what you don't know that you don't know about the authority gap. And so I actually I had the audiobook and I played some of the opening of the first chapter for them. Highly recommend this book. You did an interview with Mary Ann Siegert. That's where I discovered her from your interview on your podcast earlier. Bought the book, bought 2 copies, gave one to the boys, and kept one for myself. And they're passing it around. So highly recommend.
Excellent book. Very well written. Not only the stories, but also the research that's in there, packed full of research and stories. So the author, Mary Ann Siegert, was on the podcast in May of this year, episode 277. One of the most popular episodes of the podcast is, I think, so many, especially even women who listened to it, were blown away by what Mary Ann shared.
Yeah. And I love what Mary Ann said about the book. She said, it's not a male bashing book, and it's not a women poor us. It is the research. It is the data that suggests that points directly to the authority gap, right? And that's, again, it's not just theory. It's real stuff. And there's a lot that we can learn from that.
Chris, next question. What's a favorite TED Talk?
My favorite TED Talk goes back to the earliest days when Brene Brown wasn't a big name. And her very first TED Talk on vulnerability. I just remember watching that TED Talk and being blown away by the stories that she shared, but how everything that she shared was grounded in her research, right? And it's such an illustration of where we start. She didn't have a fashion stylist that was setting her up for that. She was pure and authentically her, and her words carried the day. And that TED Talk has been seen, I'm sure, more than a million views. It is just amazing. So that's my favorite. That's my favorite TED Talk. And I love how it's her beginnings of that before she became the name.
Yeah. She had no idea at the time that was going to happen. And it has over, I'm looking right now, 59 million views.
Unbelievable.
Think about that. One talk that was, 20 minutes long has had this huge societal impact.
Yep. And I think I said to you and Diane in the very beginning, in our first interview when you were interviewing me to come on, to join. And I think I said, I want to be the Brene Brown of leadership, right? Now, I know she speaks leadership. And in fact, one of her quotes at the end of my signature talk, I share. But yeah, I just want my work to have that kind of impact. That's my dream.
Yes, we all are capable of being leaders, and we all have the responsibility to be leaders in our spheres of influence. I love it. Okay, Chris, favorite quote?
This is Oprah Winfrey shared this in 2012 when she was doing a commencement speech at Spelman College. And I recently discovered this quote in one of my interviews for my podcast. One of the gentlemen that I was interviewing shared this with me, and it so resonated. She said to the college students, I don't want to just be successful in the world. I don't want to just make a mark or have a legacy. I want to fulfill the highest, truest expression of myself as a human being. I want to fulfill the promise that the Creator dreamed when he dreamed the cells that made me up. That gives me chills. I want to fulfill the highest, truest expression of myself as a human being. I want to fulfill the promise that the Creator dreamed when he dreamed the cells that made me up. That's my aspiration. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for being a valued member of our Speaking Your Brand community. I can't wait to see you coming up in February. For those of you listening, if you would like to learn more about the Thought Leader Academy and see if it's a good fit for what you're looking to do, you can get all the details at speakingyourbrand.com/academy. And Chris, I know you hang out on LinkedIn. I'll make sure to include a link to your LinkedIn profile as well as mine in the show notes and to your website and to your podcast so listeners can go to find you in all of those places. And thank you again.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Carol. Thank you for your inspiration. And thank you for following the nudges that you followed to say, this is what I need to do. And this is what I was meant to do. That's your leadership. And you just stepped into it. You've stepped into it boldly and you're changing the world. And we're proof of that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.